District 9 City Councilor representing Alston Brighton and the Chairman of the Ways and Means. Today is Tuesday, March 10th. I am joined by my colleague and good friend from Hyde Park, Tim McCarthy. I'd like to remind folks that this is a public hearing and is being recorded and broadcast on both Comcast Channel 8 and RCN Channel 82. I would ask everyone in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation from the administration and questions from my colleagues, we will have public testimony. And if anybody would like to testify, there's a sign-in sheet to my left at the door to the chamber. Please sign in and indicate if you'd like to testify on that sheet with your name, any affiliation, and address. Today's hearing is on docket 0341, message and order approving a supplemental appropriation of $7,746,300 to cover the FY17 cost items contained within the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Boston and the Boston Patrolmen's Association. The terms of the contracts are July 1, 2016 through June 30th, 2017, and July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2020. The major provisions of the contracts include base wage increases of 2% effective the first pay period of July of each fiscal year. The agreement also includes increases to the existing Quinn Bill / education benefits, modified steps beginning in July 2016, and increase to the hazardous duty pay beginning in July 2017. At this point, I'll turn it over to our CFO, Dave Sweeney, and your team. Thanks. And no lawyers present today, huh?
Alexis is a
sorry.
lawyer, but
No offense.
acting in her capacity as Chief of Labor Relations. So I'm Dave Sweeney, Chief Financial Officer for the city. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alexis Kitchuk, Director of Labor Relations.
And I'm Steve Whitman, Director of Labor Relations for the Police Department.
Great.
So I'll just quickly walk through the basic outline of the agreement and then leave it back to you for questions, if that's okay.
Great.
So as noted, the provision before you is a supplemental appropriation for $7.7 million to cover the FY17 supplemental costs associated with an agreement between the city and the Boston Police Patrolmen Association. This is part of an agreement that encompasses two deals, a 1-year agreement and a 3-year agreement for an overall 4-year deal. The major provisions of this, as noted, are 2% general wage increases effective each July, beginning this past July, as well as an increase to Quinn benefits to approximately 100% of value after those benefits were reduced by the state back in 2009. The arbitration award issued in 2013 brought the value of the benefits back to approximately 75% of original value, but with the city picking up the cost formerly shared with the state, this brings that provision up in a phased approach to 100% by the end of the agreement. The agreement also involves an increase to hazardous duty compensation from the current 4.75% phased into 7.75% in 1% increments. And by that, I mean 4.75 to 5.75, 6.75, 7.75 by July 2019. The provision also makes the agreement also makes modifications to what has been referred to as cumulative risk steps in the past by adding a new $1,500 5-year strip base increase, a new 10-year $3,000 strip increase, and a new 15-year $6,000 strip increase. So those are the basic outlines of the agreement. The total value over the 4 years is approximately $68 million. and the annualized cost estimated by the end of the contract, which is fiscal year 2020, is about $26 million.
Thank you. Let me first start off by saying thank you for bringing us a bargained contract this time without going through arbitration. I think the past several years, especially with public safety between the fire department and the Patrolmen's Association, it's better to work this out amongst ourselves, obviously, avoiding all kinds of extra time and acrimony. And I want to just also say to the patrolmen and all of our officers, men, women in blue, that we appreciate so much what you guys and women do every day on the streets of Boston to make us a model police department, I believe, in the entire country. Just a few questions. So how many individuals are in the bargaining unit?
Approximately 1,490.
And is that like pretty static at this point? Has that been kind of around the 1,500 number for patrolmen?
Yeah, approximately. So the city has engaged in a replacement strategy where it attempts to anticipate the number of retirees and then replaces those numbers with recruit classes based on projections and adjusts accordingly. But that's been roughly the number for the last several years.
And I would just put in a little plug now, and maybe it's not this fiscal year, but like we've talked about in the past with EMS and other services provided with our population ever increasing, we should look at expanding forces like the police department that, are seeing an increase in probably call volume and 911 calls like EMS, and just something to keep our eye on in the future. So typically we would take this allocation out of collective bargaining reserve. Can you tell me why this was, what fund this is actually coming from?
So it's actually being covered by a projected surplus we have in building permit revenue for FY17. So we've continued to have a stronger than expected experience with regard to economic development related funds coming into the city, both through property taxes and revenue streams like building permits. So we're projecting a surplus slightly in excess of this $8 million in FY17. So we're able to cover it without dipping into the collective bargaining reserve, and those funds can remain there for transfer if we settle future collective bargaining agreements with other units.
Right. And if you don't have it now, could you get me the balance of the collective bargaining reserve?
I don't have I think it's about $13 million for FY17.
For FY17. And how many more unions or collective bargaining units do we need to settle?
I believe we need to settle approximately 36 if you include Boston Public Health Commission, Boston Public Schools, and city proper unions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the cumulative risk enhancement adjustment that implements a new 5-year strip base equal to the third-year annual strip base wage plus dollar figure depending on the years of service. Can you explain that change and what that does in the out years, let's say?
Sure. So I believe that this concept was originated in the Patrolman's Award in 2013, which, if I'm correct, granted 20 and 25-year steps, as they've been referred to, valued at the time at $3,000 and $6,000 respectively. So effectively what this does is it adds steps earlier in patrolman careers by adding $1,500 at 5 years, moving the $3,000 up to 10 years, moving the $6,000 up to 15 years, and then effectively keeping in effect the 25-year step as well. So this had been a priority of the bargaining unit to, I think, provide a more, my interpretation has been a more rational stepping system, more in line with how many of our public employee unions receive step increases.
We've been since joined by the chairman of government ops, my friend from South Boston at large, Councilor Michael Flaherty. And then one more question, and I'll give my colleagues a shot here. Article 17, compensation, section 2, hazardous duty compensation is retroactive to July 1, 1987. Allows for the incremental increases to the hazardous duty differential between FY18 and FY20. So I'm just trying to get a handle on 1987. How many people qualify for this, and what is the actual cost for that?
So it's a slight clarification that the increases to hazardous duty are not retroactive to 1987. That's the original effective date of the hazardous duty provision.
Okay.
That's been updated. I believe it was updated. And so these have increased over time. So the hazardous duty pay increased percentage began at 1.25% in 1987. It increased in 1988, 89, 2008, and now will be increasing in 2017, 2018, and 2019. So there's not a high amount of retroactive associated. That's just a contractual reference to when it was originally put into effect.
Gotcha. Okay. So what? I'm sorry again. What is the step then? So the last time was 08.
Oh, so it's currently at 4.75%.
Okay.
It will step in FY18 to 5.75%, FY19 to 6.75%, and FY20 to 7.75%.
Okay. Great. Chair recognizes Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you very much. Stevie, how you doing?
Good.
Quick, just a couple of quick questions, and to echo what the chair said, it's nice to have it done at the table where it belongs. Article 16, Section 25, body cameras. Can you just go into that just a little bit? What, as we move forward, what the process is, and what kind of language is actually put into this contract?
So Steve and Alexis might be able to elaborate more than I do, but essentially the contract explicitly states that either party can request to bargain the body camera issue. That's explicitly referenced in this agreement that further bargaining will be required, and either party can request to do so.
It's more of a placeholder, Council, going forward.
Okay, that's what I figured it was. And then secondly, this is really just a quick one. Is there any language in the contract regarding hours worked as far as audit hours? You know, I'm just concerned with officers, their well-being as well as the well-being of their family. It just seems like there are, you get to the end of that 90 hours required. Patriots win the Super Bowl again, and next thing you know, you're working 100, 110, whatever hours up and over. And it's just, from my relationships with so many police officers, it's a bit much, not only on them, but on their families.
There is nothing in these contracts that address.
Obviously, like you said, there's the 90-hour rule, and then there's an 18, 19-hour rule per day. It's tough to anticipate emergency circumstances, Super Bowls, things like that. But those are the only limits that are established. There's nothing new in the contract.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
and I'm sorry, we've since been joined by Council President Michelle Wu
Good morning.
and Frank Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you just take me through the court time language in this contract and how that will work, or will there be any changes to when an officer is working a shift, but a prior arrest, his or her services are needed in a local district court? How will the contract speak to that?
So nothing in the court language has changed with the exception of court during someone's vacation. That's the only change to it. It's pretty much the way it's always been. The change would be, so it's a little confusing, but when an officer's squad is scheduled to be on a day off, that officer would be entitled, if he's on vacation, to extend his vacation by a day, if he had to attend court during those 2 days.
So just take me through a situation. Say you have an officer officers assigned to A1 and regular shift, and he's patrolling on Tremont Street, and he gets a phone call that the case that he was involved with 6 months ago is ready to go to, there's a motion to suppress, and he's needed over at the BMC.
On that particular day?
On that particular day,
So he would obviously be required to attend that.
to the court hearing.
Yes.
And then, do you guys go to the phone, and then do you call someone to take his shift slot?
I don't think we would in that case.
Okay.
It would depend on
All right.
what the staffing level is and how long that case would be.
Okay. And I only ask because every time you talk to like a sort of a rank and file officer, they're saying that they're being ordered in. What does ordered in mean?
So-
They've done their regular shift and they're about to go home, and they're ordered to stay on shift.
Correct.
And like, how often does that happen?
I don't have the exact numbers, Counsel. I'm not sure how often that does happen.
And just knowing rank and file from the city, I think that it happens a lot. And I was just curious to see, is that
From what I hear from the unions and the guys out there, they think it happens a lot. Yeah.
Right. And so is that a manpower issue? Does that mean like that we need to add personnel? Is it sort of a function of management?
I think sometimes it's a shortage of people. Other times it's, you could have, say, at 11:40 at night, someone calling sick that's unexpected, which would put you below your staffing level,
Right.
that you'd need to have someone stay.
Right. And are our classes keeping up with attrition?
That I don't have the answers for. I know there is a scheduling class now, and I think we discussed that earlier, that they're trying to maintain the current staffing level, about 1470.
Right. And then we because of our current staffing levels, we're not able to sort of meet the demands of the details. So we had this body passed, and the mayor had signed legislation that allows retirees to participate in details. Again, no cost to the city. In fact, we actually pick up, I think, the VIG on that, but it's kind of languished. Can we get a status update on retirees doing paid details for the city of Boston?
I can get you a status on. I don't have it offhand.
Great.
I know it's been discussed with legal counsel at the department level and legal counsel at the city level, but I can get you an
I
answer.
know other municipalities are doing it. The dozens and dozens of cities and towns across the Commonwealth currently
Sure.
allow their retirees, trained officers, tremendous experience, still have the uniform. For some, it may or may not fit, but most guys can squeeze into it. And a great opportunity to fulfill those details because we have so many details being unmet. And a great way to keep that training and experience and the sort of the camaraderie and the street knowledge intact. And then there's a window if they've retired and they're off the clock, if you will, for a extended period of time, they're not eligible to participate in the program. So I say that if other cities and towns are doing it, why aren't we doing it? We passed it. Mayor was on board with it, and it just kind of got stuck in a BPD administrative quagmire that has to be freed up. And I don't know if it had anything to do with this contractual language or not, but pretty basic stuff. And let's get these retirees. And what I think it would do is it potentially could incentivize some folks that are ready to go but are sort of hanging on to maybe go, which will allow us to backfill those slots at the academy with some new recruits and some fresh legs, but have that type of street experience out in the neighborhoods by the dozens, because these details, if the detail goes unmanned, that's a police presence that could and should be there, but it's not. And nothing like having that type of presence throughout all of our neighborhoods at construction sites and other types of details. So I'm going to continue to push for it. It's something that makes perfect sense for our city. Cost us nothing. We actually get a benefit from it. But for some reason it's stuck. And I didn't know if it was sort of part and parcel to this contract being resolved before we did that or not. It's completely irrelevant to this. Then I just want to make sure that we get it up and running.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Alex.
Thank you. We've since been joined by Councilor Tito Jackson and Andrea Campbell. Chair recognizes Councilor Wu.
Can you hear me? Great. So I have some questions, maybe less about the contract provisions, which my colleagues have already asked some great questions on, and more about the city's budget preparations given the settling of this. First, I want to also echo the approval and thanks for settling this at the table, and appreciate both parties working together on that. Just following up on Councilor McCarthy's line of question around body cameras, and there's also, I saw another placeholder for dashboard cameras and further bargaining TBD on that. How does that fit in with city budget plans for the department, and particularly if the body camera pilot is now set to maybe go through the summer? Will it just amend the contract, the second contract, the one starting in July 2017, going through June 2020, or how will that work?
So, in terms of from a negotiation standpoint, the two parties, if the city wished to implement a permanent program, would re-engage with the union and begin negotiating. I think it's premature for me to say how that would be incorporated into the city's budget. We haven't begun meetings with the mayor even to talk about the FY18 budget yet. As you know, there was some money included in this year's budget for the early costs of the body camera pilot. So it's obviously something very much on our radar, but we probably won't know until early to mid-April when we actually submit the mayor's recommended budget, what cost implications a potential body camera program would have.
Okay, just the concerns that we've been hearing from the community are around the timing of funding. So if something needs to get into the April budget in order for the funding to be there starting in after the summer, and then bargaining will have to kind of factor into the timeline as well. I just want to be sure that the continuation, if there is a continuation, and assuming there is an expansion, that timing wouldn't have to be delayed for another set of months while this happens, and then the budgeting happens. And then just curious about how the cadet program fits into this at all. I mean, it's not necessarily. I mean, once cadets complete the program and they're on the force, then the contract applies. But again, in terms of budgeting, does settling this have any impact on that?
So the cadets are represented by the BPPA, and we're in the process, since that unit has been reconstituted, practically speaking, we're in the process of bargaining that out at this point.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilor Frank Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to echo what Michelle had to say about actually getting to the table and negotiating in a timely fashion. I remember the way the last administration did it. Can we talk a little bit about Quinn? What going back to previous, what was lost and then what was restored here in this contract?
So during the Great Recession, the 2009-2010 period, the state began reducing its Quinn payments to the city. So this may be a slight oversimplification, but essentially the city was responsible for half of the Quinn benefit. The state was responsible for half. And officers, if the state prorated its appropriation, officers only received the prorated amount. And that occurred for a period of time, and then eventually the state's share was eliminated entirely.
And that was state law.
That was state law. That was then, I believe, challenged by the union as to whether the city had an obligation to pay the state's share, and it was determined that it did not. But this became a subject of bargaining and then ultimately the arbitration award in 2013, which at a basic level restored the full benefit to about 75% of what was previously paid by the end of the contract from the employee's perspective,
So we picked up
but
another
all with
quarter.
city funds. Yep. This brings that level back to an approximate 100% by the end of this contract. The difference, obviously, being that this is now a complete obligation of the cities and the states no longer participating in any way.
Thank you. I'm all set.
Counselor Jackson.
Thank you very much, and I am happy to hear that we're not being forced to vote on something that's already been settled, and would require us to go back 6 years and take it apart. I guess the couple of areas that I wanted to hit on. I wasn't here for the conversation about body cameras, but I think. I want to understand why we wouldn't be bargaining body cameras now, and what would be the cost. And again, these are technologies that are not new. Dash cams are well over 20 some odd years old, and the reason why I bring this up in this hearing is that the city of Boston has spent $38 million settling cases in the past 7 years, and so it is an issue that affects the financial bottom line of the city of Boston. So one, I want to understand when there was the court case that occurred around body cameras. Can you explain what the court determined there, and also where this would stand in this upcoming budget with the full implementation of body cameras across this bargaining unit? And the reason why I bring up the court is it was a question of whether or not it was something that had to be bargained, and I need a refresher on what the judge actually said.
In July, the city entered into a memorandum of agreement for a 6-month pilot program with the BPPA. The program was discussed as volunteers would be paid $500 at the conclusion of the 6-month pilot. The court action stemmed from that there was a lack of volunteers. At that time, the department started choosing members of the police force who would wear the cameras. The court action more or less did not deal with the budgeting or the program overall, but whether the department and the city should be allowed to force cameras on officers who did not volunteer for the pilot program.
And the court determined
That the city was within its right to do so.
and they were in its right to do so because it was a part of their uniform?
Because there were no volunteers and the commissioner had established that this was something that he felt was operationally necessary, the court sided with the commissioner's authority to sign off.
Okay. And the reason why we're not bargaining full implementation of body cameras?
So currently, we're still within the 6-month pilot program. The department is using 2 different vendors, and it is expected that they will analyze the data from the download and the view quality and other parameters within this program in determining next steps.
Yeah, and I get it, but $38 million is what we've spent so far in the past 7 years. And so when we look at the total cost relative to the expenditures and the hit that we could have used for a bunch of other aspects for policing as well as education and other parts, I think it is critical that we move forward with full implementation. We're not the first, and by the way, this is not a program that is untested across the United States of America. And I just would push to ensure that we have the best. We have the hardest working police officers. I believe that we have the best police officers, and I think that we should have the most technologically enabled police force in the United States of America. And I think this is a component of that. And so I think that is something that we need to deal with. In terms of the how much will the Quinn bill cost?
So the annual cost by the end of the contract for the so-called new increment is about 3.9 million per year for this unit.
And is that over and above the aggregate cost of 68 million?
No,
Okay.
that's
It's
the
bu-
all in.
It's baked in.
Yeah.
Okay. And what will be the average police pay?
I don't know the average. We can give you the full scale. So it would now run from a first year patrolman making approximately $68,000 to somebody with over 25 years of service making $100,000. That's different from earnings, obviously. If overtime details, specialty differentials, or something like that were included.
So it'll be helpful if you can get that to us, because what we've had in the past is we've had police and fire use average compensation, and so what we get put into position of is there parity?
Right.
And so when we don't know that number, then I like surprises on my birthday and Christmas. But I don't like it in these types of negotiations. I also, I guess, around the classes component, I believe that the issue around overtime, and I'd love to hear from the department, the overtime numbers, and when I speak to officers, I hear a lot of folks say that they have mandatory overtime and they're required to do. They're required to stay on. So if we were to pull back and look at it from a business perspective, do we have enough officers, and could we better use those dollars that we currently use on a year-to-year basis that increased a lot last year on the overtime budget for additional officers on the police department? And then have we looked at injuries and folks being out based on 90 hours is a long time during the week, and many of us work long hours, but most of us don't aren't in situations where folks could potentially shoot us. So has there been an analysis of the actual numbers and relative to, do we have enough police officers, and could the overtime budget be better used with additional officers?
So I think we've done a good amount of work in this area. Obviously, there's an annual question as to what the size of a police class should be, as we've typically put on a police class every year. And that's when this type of discussion comes up, where we work with the City Hall departments, such as budget and A&F, work with the police department to try to determine what's necessary in terms of a class coming up. I would add, with regard to overtime, is there's number one, there's not always a sort of a one-to-one movement of, if we had one more officer, we would reduce overtime by an equivalent amount. And the department actually reduced the number of overtime hours by 10% last fiscal year. So there's been a high amount of progress on overtime recently.
But did the cost go up though?
I believe the cost went down slightly. So we've budgeted in FY17 at a cost that's over $5 million less than what we spent last year, and a savings of about $9 million from if we hadn't made any reforms to overtime. So I think we're making some progress, moving in the right direction. This was something that was noted in our recent affirmation of our AAA bond ratings last week, is management efforts to reduce overtime in major departments as well. So it's been validated independently.
But I guess my question, because your net, what occurred was you guys used to double the overtime in this budget essentially, and so what occurred, and Mayor Walsh put forward a budget that actually increased what's basically more realistic in terms of what was occurring, right? So it'd be 35, and then we'd come here and it'd be 70, 60. Right? And so, or 60 or 70. And last year you put 55. Was it 55?
That's about right. It's about 35, 60, 55. rough numbers, 54, I think.
Yeah, so I just think, and so again, that's still, as a percentage of the budget, a substantial percent over and above the base level budget. And so I guess I think my push would be to examine or do an analysis of what additional officers would actually look like. And then also that needs to be squared with the attrition of officers. And this is one of the business units that actually has a mandatory retirement. So I guess that is something that we should be thinking about in terms of our budgeting. How many people are retiring in the next, actually during this time frame, and do we have class capacity commensurate with the folks who are going to be retiring, at least for one-to-one on that front.
And I think to your last point, that is something we monitor very closely, attrition, and we budget a certain size class and we make adjustments if necessary, if attrition is higher or lower than expected throughout the year.
Yeah. And I guess the last area, how does this deal with or address diversity in the police department at all, in the manner in which people are recruited into the department? One of the issues that we've seen in the past couple of years is less diversity in the classes. So how or where is that codified that we would be able to address those issues in a city that is that deserves a police department that is a reflection of the city of the people in the city of Boston?
Yeah, I'm not. Is there a particular part of the contract that addresses diversity in hiring?
I'm asking what I'm asking, and what I'm saying. We just talked about classes, and we also there are aspects across the board that have to be bargained when it comes to changes that occur in any aspects relative to hiring, as well as the job that is done here. So, and I've sat in diversity meetings with former Commissioner Davis, and many of the things that we discussed had to be bargained. And so, my question is: has the administration broached these issues with this bargaining unit, and what has been the outcome to provide a force that is more diverse and more of a reflection of the city of Boston?
So I wasn't a part of those meetings, so I'm not sure what about diversity you're referencing, but as you know, that the main driver of hiring protocols with regard to police is civil service, which is a state law that cannot be amended through a collective bargaining process. There have been a number of efforts going on within the administration to diversify throughout the ranks, including the most diverse command staff in the city's history, and also the cadet class, I believe, is 3/4 women and people of color, which is one of the tools the city has to increase diversity within a civil service system.
And I want to give props to Councilor Flaherty for the work that he continues to do and pushing for additional residency requirements and longer residency to ensure that we have folks who are from Boston, and we love all veterans. But I think there is something to be said about veterans who are coming from local neighborhoods and communities in the city of Boston, and their ability to have a unique perspective on serving our community. And so I think that becomes a huge issue, and I think we should be ensuring that we push for a department that is a reflection of the city of Boston. I believe that makes it safer, and that people being able to get around Boston without using Waze or Google Maps is a really good thing. So I think we really need to continue to do a better job in that space, because sadly, most of the folks who are applying who are not veterans, basically in the last 4 or 5 classes, pretty much have no opportunity to get on and serve and do that job. What are the financial hits in the FY18, FY19, 2021 budgets?
I gotta get
Are you asked the cost of the contract? So the overall cost is $68 million over 3 years. The annualized cost by the end is $26 million.
just do this.
In terms of specific years,
And I'm sorry, it's 16, 17, 18, 19.
so the estimated costs are FY17, 7.7 million, FY18, 13.8 million, FY19, 20.8 million, and FY20, 25.9 million.
25.9.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Siamo, and thank you guys for being here today and for your hard work on this. And I echo my colleagues when I say it is great to go through normal processes. So thank you for your hard work. I just have a few follow-up questions. Much of what I was going to ask has already been asked. Just going back to the Quinn payments, has there been any conversation with the state on them sort of going back to their original obligation of making payments when it comes to Quinn payments, or going back to their original obligation, which was to make some sort of payment to the city of Boston for Quinn?
I have not had a conversation like that with the state. That doesn't mean that they haven't occurred. We've been focused on our existing state aid streams, which are sort of equally problematic in terms of recent history. So this year we've been focusing on trying to increase our charter reimbursement rate and Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid, particularly unrestricted aid and charter reimbursement. I have not heard anything about an appetite for a successor or replacement plan at the state level. From what I've read, the recent news about state revenues have been poor. I think there was hope that there was some recovery from the warnings that the administration had given in October, and then in the new year. But the news yesterday from State House News seemed to indicate that they're as pessimistic as they had been earlier in the year. That tells me that there's probably very little capacity for them, absent a new revenue source, to bring back a program like this. Obviously, that would be a tremendous benefit to the city if half of the Quinn obligation were to be picked up by the state as it had been a decade ago.
Right. I mean, obviously, I think Quinn payments are essential, and I applaud the city of Boston for picking those payments up. With anything coming from the state, or where we used to get funding from the state, the question is always, will the state return to its obligation in some way? And at some point, do we have conversations around this? But it sounds like the city's general conversation with the state is about overall state allocation to us as a city for various programming that we give to our residents and our employees.
That sounds accurate.
Just a quick question on body cameras. Do you know, has there been any conversations with the union, even prior to this, on whether or not the current pilot program would be extended? I know the commissioner at one of the hearings I held, which was a general update on where we were with the pilot program, mentioned that the mayor, weren't opposed to extending the pilot, but obviously that was an item that had to be negotiated, or the union had to be a part of those conversations. So curious as to whether the commissioner and the mayor, or you guys on behalf of the mayor, have had any conversations with the union about extending the pilot program.
So, like your reference, I'm aware that that's an option that has been discussed with the commissioner, but I have not had any direct conversations with the union about that. that's something I'll certainly check in on, though.
I mean, that would be good to know. I think the last update to us and then maybe to community was it's a conversation that obviously needs to be had with the union, and curious as to what the status of those conversations are. The third question, going back to the overtime conversation. So I know in the last budget, I applauded you guys as well as the department on overtime costs and in the department's efforts to try some new initiatives to cap some of these costs. Where are we with respect to BPD and those overtime costs and capping overtime costs?
So the initiative and the policy remains in place. I'm not present, but I believe it's something that's still a focal point of the commissioner in his office. It's something I talk to him and his command staff about fairly frequently. It was put in place initially in the middle of the last fiscal year, and the department was very successful in reducing hours by 10%. I think we had a more ambitious goal of reducing it by essentially an additional 5% in the current fiscal year, and that's something that continues to be a goal of the department. It remains to be seen whether that target will actually be hit, but it is something we're very focused on. We believe, and I think the department believes, that there is room for improvement in terms of overtime hours, but also recognizes that some level of overtime is a necessity for public safety purposes as well as issues arise.
Absolutely. I think with, some of the recent articles about overtime, looking at the cost of overtime, the question I guess becomes, what other tools do we look at to reduce those overall costs? And following up on Councilor Jackson's point, one is definitely whether or not we need more officers, and what that looks like. It's a conversation I think we occasionally have around here, but maybe not as much as we should. So I'm just curious, what other tools do we look at when it comes to overtime costs, if any? Are there conversations that are happening related to that?
Yeah, I'm not I'm not an expert in specifically how the implementation is going, but I know there are discussions around issues such as assignments and just there have been discussions about through ComStat meetings with the police, just ensuring that the captains and people in those types of positions are sort of accountable for sort of justifying the overtime that does occur. So I think it's something that needs to be managed, obviously. I think despite some of the headlines with the recent earnings released, overtime was actually down across the city in terms of spending 2%, which is, you don't usually see things like that go down. So I think we're very proud that it's moving in that direction. But as with everything, if we don't continue to make it a focal point, then there's always the liability that progress slips away.
Can you walk me through so right now, obviously in the contract, there's provisions in here about overtime related to officers who go to court, who have to do overnight stays for various pickups, all the things within their duties, right? But can you walk me through a sort of a typical scenario, and BPD, of course, can chime in as well, but a typical scenario for an officer who is asked to stay for an overtime shift, what that looks like in terms of pay, in terms of compensation?
So it's overtime in those instances. I don't have exact numbers for you how
No
often
problem.
it happens, but it would be if there's a shortage in the district due to vacations, if they go below their staffing requirement for that shift, it could be something as late as someone calling in sick at the last minute of a shift, and you need to have somebody there. It's difficult to call someone in and wait for them to get in. So you would have to take who's on that shift, and occasionally it's people who've already worked. Obviously, the shift before it, they may have had court in the morning and things like that.
So if an officer is required to stay overtime, what's their rate of compensation?
It's an overtime rate. I think all the rates vary depending on where the person is in their their years on and things like that. But it varies. It's overtime for sure, but it varies.
Is there a way of getting actual numbers related to those rates?
Yeah, so we have a
And the
significant.
only reason I ask, because you obviously see some of this stuff printed in the news, and like you said, there's no acknowledgement of some of the savings that have occurred. No discussion, of course, around the initiative that this body passed with BPD and trying to rein in some of these overtime costs. Other conversations that might be happening related to overtime, or that there's these different rates. So I'm looking to sort of pull this apart a little bit. And obviously, the contract doesn't go into detail
No.
as to what those things are.
But we have a significant amount of differentiated data on overtime and what type of overtime and rates of overtime, so we can get that to you.
That would be great. And just my last point, the 68 million, I apologize for being late this morning. 7.7 million for FY17, 13.8, 20.8, and 25.9.
Apologies, 7.7, 13.8, 20.9, and 25.9.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for your hard work again, and thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Councilor Siomo.
And we've been joined by City Councilor Sal Lamatina and at-large City Councilor Ayanna Presley. Councilor Lamatina?
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
First, I want to congratulate the administration and the BPPA for negotiating this agreement, so they didn't have to go through arbitration. So that's a big plus for us, particularly on the council, because I mentioned in the last one that if it ever came back here, there was no way I was going to support it. So I'm glad that you guys are working it out. So my main concern has always been, overtime. I really believe that we should hire more police officers, if that's going to help. So can you tell me where exactly we are on the number of, I'm sorry, I'm sure you probably already mentioned this earlier, how many patrolmen we have out there?
1490.
1490, thank you. I didn't ask you.
Sorry.
He's
Chief.
correct. Yeah.
1490. And at its peak, what should the number be?
I'm not sure. In recent history, this is about where the number of BPPA representation has been. I don't know.
So the peak was probably when we were getting funds from the feds during the Clinton days, maybe.
So there's.
I don't know what that
So
number
this
would
is
be.
this is a I believe this is a subgroup of uniformed officers. Obviously, there are 4 bargaining units that represent them. They're by far the largest, but I believe of this particular group, this has been the normal census number for the last several years. I can get you some specific historical info though afterwards if that's useful.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, if we were to hire more police officers, would the cost of overtime go down? Can you find that out?
I think we
You
would,
have it?
I think we would need to perform an analysis on that. I don't think it's quite as straightforward as we would like it to be in terms of a sort of one-to-one trade-off. There may, in fact, be other benefits to increasing the force aside from financial benefits, but I would caution against assuming that there would be an overall reduction in costs by adding employees. I think that works better theoretically than it does in practice oftentimes.
So know what I would love if you could do for me?
What's that?
I would love if you could give me a breakdown of all the events that are mandatory overtime, right? And the costs for that overtime. That would be helpful for me.
We can see if we can do that.
But again, thank you. I want to thank BPPA, their membership, for the work that they do for the city of Boston, because I love my police.
Chair recognizes Council Flaherty for a follow-up question.
Thank you. And there was the same line of inquiries, like when officers are ordered in, when they're ordered to do the overtime, getting a breakdown sort of per district and per event would be key as well for me. Just want to follow up on the body camera and the dashboard cam. I know we're in the middle of a pilot program. Have we identified the cost associated with body and dashboard cameras the hardware, the software, the maintenance and repair, chain of custody, data storage, retrieval, things like that. Have we sort of done a full vetting as to what that number is? Ballpark?
So we began gathering data on this quite a while ago. However, the outcomes of the pilot program would have a large impact on what those costs end up being, because that would, in the analysis associated with the pilot program, would probably inform recommendations as to some of the key issues such as data storage, because expense is largely driven by policy decisions about retention of data, about the specifics of chain of custody, all of those types of things. If there are any employee related costs would be another driver. So I think we don't know just yet, because it's dependent on the ultimate design of what a body camera program would look like if that were to be implemented. It would likely be several $1 million a year, probably upwards of $5 million. But I don't think we have a firm number on that at the moment.
And I'll just put another plug in then for the retirees doing the paid details. So we get a 10% administration fee on all private contracts. So we're running around a $30 million detail system right now. We're not even keeping up. So just argument's sake, say we push that to a $40 million detail. 10% of that is $4 million a year that the city would generate for the retirees doing paid detail. So it could be an opportunity to pay for some of these costs that are being outlined. So just wanted to put a plug in there. We passed it, mayor signed it, everyone was on board with it, and then it hit some wall when we currently know 175 other cities and towns have this. I also think it would be an incentive to sort of follow up on what Councilor Tito Jackson was saying. It would be an incentive. There's a lot of patrolmen and women that are ready to go. They haven't reached the age of 65, but if they had this program, this retiree detail program, to sort of either supplement their income or to keep them involved, keep them active with their training and experience, and they would probably go a little sooner than waiting for 65, which would allow us to be able to backfill those slots. So just want to keep that in mind as we're talking about this contract, but also talking about moving forward with that potential $3 to $5 million new revenue stream that potentially could be paying for this program. So, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, my colleagues.
Thank you. Council Presley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I have to say, in my almost 8-year tenure, this is the first time that I'm discussing a public safety contract that was negotiated and not handed down by an arbiter, and I'm certainly encouraged by that. I too apologize for my tardiness. I had a long-standing conflict in the neighborhood. And I do believe a number of my questions have already been asked, and I apologize that you were having to be repetitive. But wanted to join the chorus of endorsers and wanting to get the body camera program to full implementation. And I know you've already answered this, but just wanting to be very clear about, I know the 6-month pilot is being analyzed, but what is that process? How long will that take? Timeline and cost to get us to full implementation. We've been great partners in this pilot. Councilor Campbell had a hearing to get a report back on what the experiences have been. They were favorable and positive. So this does seem to be low-hanging fruit, working hand in glove with the other efforts in partnership with community and BPD around transparency, ensuring the safety of all. And so.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you caught it. Councilor Wu brought this up in the context of budget coming.
Yes.
I say that only to note that the issue of whether this is funded in the FY18 budget will become apparent in April, a month from now. The pilot program is actually ongoing still, so the analysis has not begun with the full set of data. We're going to have to make a determination about where we are in the likelihood of the program's implementation in order to inform decisions about including a budget for this program
Okay.
sometime in the next few weeks, frankly, in order
Okay.
to have this.
Well, keep us apprised. I mean,
Absolutely.
again, encouraged by the progress and the report back of the pilot, and I think it's safe to say that we are all in agreement that we should be moving towards full implementation and mandatory usage. That's fair to say. That we're in agreement. That is the goal.
I don't think I'm qualified to say
Okay.
that as the financial person.
Yes.
I think that's more of a question for Commissioner Evans. I do think that that my sense is there are a lot of sort of minute policy issues that need to be sorted out in designing exactly what a program looks like to anticipate all of the issues that could arise. So I think the analysis portion of this process will be very important.
And will there be a cost attached to that? So it's my understanding that the money that had, and correct me if I'm wrong, have been allocated, that all of those funds have not been used for the implementation of the pilot program. So I'm just curious about if there are surplus funds, is that being held somewhere, sort of an escrow, for lack of a better phrasing, to then be applied towards the implementation and mandatory usage? Or would that be used towards the analysis?
So I believe we budgeted $500,000 in FY17 for body camera pilot. Some of that funding is going to fund the patrolman wearing body cameras, the payments that they will receive for wearing them.
Oh, the stipend, okay.
And I believe the balance of that may be used for the study of what
That
the
was my
data
question,
says.
the analysis.
So
Okay.
there's no budgetary issues with completing the analysis, if that's
Okay.
kind of the question.
Okay.
We would have to obviously we'll have to make a decision about how much to fund for a permanent program. If that
Do we know how
becomes a
much of that
position.
500,000 is currently,
Um,
what is the balance? Because the $500 stipends don't account for that, or the technology. It doesn't seem.
No, so the technology is actually being provided at low or no cost to the city on
Sure.
a pilot basis. It would eventually we would probably have to purchase it. if
So
it
that's
becomes
what
a
I'm curious
permanent
about, the
program.
500,000 that was allocated.
I think we anticipate the study will cost a couple of $100,000
Okay.
that will take us to somewhere close to the 500 probably this year. And if this program is to expand or be made permanent, it'll probably be a different scale that the
Okay.
budget is at that point.
Okay, very good. The other question that I had, and again, I commend BPD for, I believe overtime has been reduced by 10%. I don't know what those reduction strategies have been. And so picking up on Councilor Lamatina's point, that was actually going to be my question, which is when is mandatory overtime, and what is accounting for the lion's share of the overtime by our patrolmen? What sort of events and activities in the city? Is that something that you could speak to?
So I don't know the lion's share of it, where it comes. The mandatory would be staffing level shortages in the districts, which can account for, I guess, people on vacation, last minute call-ins for sick. There's also a lot of events in the city, some of them planned, some of them unplanned, that you need a large resources.
Okay.
That would take some of that.
And then, we all keep talking about the need to have more police, and that's to offset the overtime, and also to be fair to our officers in ensuring, their wellness and everyone's safety. We don't want them to be, overworked and experience their own trauma, in the job. We want to make sure that folks are getting the rest that they need. Could you speak to, so it says there are 1,490 members of the BPPA. If you are a police officer, are you automatically a member of the BPPA?
I believe if you have the rank of patrolman and are not rated as a detective, you would be represented by the BPPA.
Okay, but that number does not represent everyone.
No, the detectives, detective superiors, and superior officers as
Okay.
well, and then command staff, of course,
Okay.
and civilians.
So, but when we're talking about the need for more officers, the number that we're talking about is specifically the 1490. And then could you, generally speaking, I'm just trying to get to, since we all agree that we need more officers, and is there sort of a multi-year strategy and plan enhanced by the cadet program that we'll get to? I don't have a good understanding of how many officers we're losing based upon retirement. Could you speak to that? So if the number is 1490, how many officers are we on pace to continue to lose?
So I think the number, if you include the other units, is actually over 2,000. And I think what we're expecting next year is something like the need for a 75 to end with 75 recruits making it through the academy in order to replace retirees. There
That was my question. Okay.
Seems to be a sense with when speaking to people within the department that at some point in time there'll be a higher rate of attrition, and that we will at that point need to adjust our classes accordingly when we start seeing that trend actually take root. We will continue. I know it's a priority of the mayors to properly staff Boston Police Department as well. So it is something we continually look at as to whether the staffing levels are adequate. The city has benefited from supplemental funds like the COPS grant, for instance, in the past that has provided several years of funding for officers that the city then absorbs the cost of when the grant runs out. I think that there's a high level of uncertainty about the future of programs like this with regard to federal funding in general, and whether the city is in a position to receive federal funding for a number of reasons.
Okay.
But it is something we're continuing to look at.
Okay, so we can calibrate and deal with overtime costs. I don't know what the reduction strategies were to get us to that 10% drop, but maybe when we have a better understanding of where, again, the lion's share of that overtime has been allocated, and we have that data, we can get at where there are opportunities. But the main way that we get at that is with expanding the number, increasing the number, and doing that in keeping with the number of officers that we're losing. So I appreciate your answering sort of how we get at that. And then my final question, and it may not be able to be answered here today, and it's a very predictable question coming from me. Certainly we're all very committed to the Boston Police Department being reflective of the city of Boston. Councilor Campbell will be doing and Councilor Linehan a report back on the cadet program and recruitment strategies and what that looks like. I just wanted to, in the midst of also underscoring how important that is to strengthen our community policing and just as a value and also as a public safety tenant. But I just wanted to make sure we don't forget about the women in that as well. So I am curious to know what are our percentages when it comes to women?
I don't have the demographic breakdown offhand, but that's obviously something we can get you.
Okay, excellent. Appreciate it. All right, thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your patience.
Thank you. That concludes this portion of the hearing. I have one speaker, President of the Municipal Research Bureau, Sam Tyler, if you want to come down. And then we're going to try to start. We only have the CFO for an hour for our post-audit hearing, so.
I'll stick around.
And while he's making his way down, I would also just want to end by emphasizing the need for detail officers to really look hard at what we passed a year or so ago. There's too many details that are critical in all of our neighborhoods that are causing tremendous traffic problems because details aren't being provided because there's just a shortage and we have a massive building boom. So I'd really want you to look hard at trying to get that program implemented. Great. Hi, Sam.
We're still here. In the interest of your 11 o'clock hearing and a 11 o'clock meeting I'll cut through this very quickly. But frankly, as somebody who has come before you at times of contracts that were settled by binding arbitration and have argued against the city council approving those contracts, would join with everybody else in congratulating the parties, the BPPA bargaining unit, the city's bargaining unit in a negotiated contract. That doesn't mean that it's not an expensive contract. It's 60. This is the first of whether it's 37 or 36 other contracts yet to be negotiated that will come before this committee. And particularly with the other three police unions, this sort of sets the standard a bit perhaps, which is why this is important. The salary increase of 2 over 4 years seems reasonable, but at the same time, it represents only 46% of the total cost of the contract. So that it's, as you know, it's the other factors that have been already discussed in terms of the Quinn bill, the steps with the cumulative risk enhancement adjustment, the hazardous duty. I mean, those expenses represent 54% of the total cost. So those are of concern. I guess for somebody who's been around from the very beginning of the Quinn bill, and this being a union that agreed that if the state did not pay its 50%, that they would accept that, and now we're back to 100%. Sort of grates a little bit, but that's what we get from negotiations. I guess the other concern is, what does the city get for the $68 million? Other than that we have a contract in place for 4 years, but what are the language changes that we're paying for and should expect in terms of real change? How we select arbitrators, officer swap, that they're paid their own salary, the court vacation time. Frankly, that's not a major change in my mind. I mean, it's not like we're deciding that the paid detail office is now going to be civilians, so we can get police officers on the street. That would be a major management reform, so I think this contract really doesn't do much in that respect. But it will be approved. I think there's the bigger question, and we've had this discussion when we've had binding arbitration decisions come before you that are very expensive, but the question is always, what can the city afford this? And I think the issue is here. I mean, this is just one of 4 public safety unions. The firefighters will come next year, but over the time we've seen the budget grow, but it's more on the public safety school side. So the issue is, with these contracts that are expensive, what's the impact on other city services? And I think we've seen it in terms of personnel levels, that there's been it's been either stable or declined in other departments because of the cost of the big 3 departments, and the collective bargaining drives that. In that 68% of the city budget is in employee costs. In response to the questions that have come up in terms of could we add more police officers to reduce overtime, I know in past administrations when that issue has been looked at and considered, the feeling had been that it would just increase overtime, not reduce overtime. So it's not going to be the panacea, and I think the Chief Financial Officer sort of alluded to that issue as well. I would share with Councilman McCarthy the concern about hours worked. I know that's not really part of this contract, but if you have an officer who makes $58,000 in overtime costs and $121,000 in pay detail on top of regular tour, it does raise the question of how alert and sharp are they when they're on duty and need to be alert. But that's beyond that. So I guess I'll just say this, the council really ought to be looking at the longer term consequences of these contracts. Where officers are making several, and it's getting to be more and more, over $300,000 a year. That's going to affect at some point in time class sizes, or it'll affect dollars available for other services. So I mean, I'm not here to say you should not do what you're going to do, which is approve the contract, but there are issues to think about in terms of contracts like this that are expensive and will have a long-term impact. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate those words. So that concludes this hearing. I want to thank everybody in attendance, and this hearing is adjourned.